trying to flip down?
Yeah.
You have to do it like in increments.
There we go.
Great, perfect. So I'm going to move now from talking about production and acting all the way over to reception. So I'm going to do like a bit of a breakneck speed. So whenever critics and theorists of theatre felt the need to define its ultimate essence, they have tended to whittle down the act of performance to the bare bones of a temporal and spatial co-presence between at least one actor and at least one audience member. However, recordings of theatre productions have been challenging the notion that a theatre experience is necessarily something that has to happen with the audience and actors in the same space at the same time, for over a century now. In the past decade, the rise of live theatre broadcasting to cinemas has amplified the pressure put on ontologies of theatre, and the development of online theatre broadcasts has pushed this even further. Theatre streaming online allows audiences to disrupt the temporality of their theatre experiences by entering or leaving at any moment, pausing, tracking back, and replaying sections, as well as enabling them to watch at a completely different time to the performance itself. So, in this paper, I'm going to explore how theatre broadcasts force us to reconsider our understanding of how audiences receive, experience, and participate with theatre and performance. So I'm going to begin with a brief overview of live theatre broadcasts, or if that's a repetition of stuff that people already know. And then I'm going to introduce my current research project. And then I'm going to talk about a pilot survey that I did. So it'll become clear as I go through it. My research project is on broadcasts of Shakespeare specifically. What did you say? Just looking at me. So my broadcast is specifically about my research project is about Shakespeare specifically. So in setting out the necessity, I'm going to set out the necessity for a methodology that incorporates audience research, and I'm going to be focusing on in detail on the strand of my projects that investigates audiences of online broadcasts. I'm hoping to explore the challenges involved in researching this particular audience group, but I also hope to demonstrate what we can learn about audience reception from them. And as I said, I'm going to look at some results from a pilot survey that I've done. So a bit of a disclaimer, the pilot survey, I got the results of that 3 days ago. So it's definitely not a close analysis of the results that I got. It's more of a kind of an initial impressions. Cool, so is it going to work? Okay, so live theatre broadcast has been, it's kind of developed over the past 10 years. The National Theatre began broadcasting their work to cinemas in 2009 after seeing the success of the New York Metropolitan Opera screening, which by then had been running for 3 years. Since then, they've been followed, specifically in terms of Shakespeare, by the RSC's Live from Chapel and Avon programme, and between them, they've broadcast 27 Shakespeare productions to date. So whilst NT Live and the RSC have dominated cinema screenings, other companies, including Cheek by Jowl, Tara Arts, Shakespeare's Globe, and the Belarus 3 Theatre Company, have in the past 3 years made their Shakespeare productions available to watch online for free. And in a different kind of direction, RSC have also pioneered a schools broadcast programme where a play is broadcast live directly into participating cinemas across the UK. It's really warm now, you've shut that. Can you open it again? Literally.
Is that a good balance between?
Yeah, I think so. Cool, thank you. So clearly then, theatre broadcasts are continuing to open up new ways of encountering and participating with Shakespeare performance. While some initial audience research has been done with audience of theatre broadcasts in cinemas, including a study by Martin Barker into audiences at Pitch House cinemas, we remain largely in the dark about exactly why and how remote audiences are participating with these performances and what they value about these experiences. So my current research project sets out to investigate how theatre broadcasts are impacting audiences for Shakespeare, testing the idea that the mode of participation will have a relationship with how an audience member values the material or the experience. It aims, on the one hand, to find out about emerging audience practices, and on the other hand, it aims to find out what motivates them to watch and how they value the experiences that they have. So finding out the answers to these questions, I don't know if you can see that, it's quite small, requires both quantitative and qualitative data that can really only be acquired through audience research. So in order to structure my project and to get a broader view as possible of the impact of theatre broadcasts in its different forms, I've organised my project around 3 possible types of audience encounter. So those screening venues, school broadcasts, and online broadcasts. And I'll just quickly introduce methodology for the first 2, and then I'm going to focus specifically on the methodology for the online broadcasts. So screening venues include cinemas, art centres, community venues, which are all incorporated under the screening venues umbrella. So basically any venue that organises an official screening of a theatre production for a group of people. So due to the scope of my project and because they are so far relatively under-researched, I'm going to be focusing on small independent cinemas or venues. And my methodology is going to consist of distributing a paper survey about theatre broadcast experiences to audiences attending a Shakespeare broadcast at the venues. And those are going to be followed up with in-depth interviews with audience members and also with decision makers at the venues themselves. Cool. So school broadcast, the research is going to be mainly observational, observing two school broadcasts in different schools and interviewing teachers of the classes. Okay, so moving on to online broadcasts. So in investigating online audiences, I'm interested in answering 5 main research questions, so 5 main groups of research questions. So 1, how do audiences participate with Stream Shakespeare Online? Why do audiences participate? Who is participating? What do they value about the experience? And what is this audience's relationship to Shakespeare? So each of these larger questions will include smaller sub-questions. So the first set of questions includes questions about about viewing practices. So are streaming audiences participating in groups, for example? Okay. So in order to investigate audience response to live broadcasts online, I've designed an online survey which is aimed obviously at audiences who watch particularly a Shakespeare production online. And I hope that it's going to provide a mix of quantitative and qualitative responses, which will then be followed up with one-on-one interviews, which I'm going to carry out over instant messenger or email. Okay, so just a couple of comments on the challenges and opportunities that this particular audience group represents in terms of audience research. So unlike the screening venues or school audiences, the online audience are disparate and remote, making them potentially challenging to access and research. That's kind of borne out in this 2016 Live to Digital report, which was funded by the Arts Council England and the Society of London Theatre, which set out to investigate streaming audiences through an online survey, but used theatre partners to distribute the survey and actually excluded respondents who had not attended the theatre in the past 5 years. So that meant that the experiences of those who may have streamed theatre but never been to the theatre in person weren't represented. So whilst the difficulty of finding online audiences is a potential challenge, their dislocation from a theatre or cinema also offers opportunities in that there are no institutional barriers to conducting the research, or very few, and it won't be steered by a potentially particular agenda. Utilising instant messenger and email for the interviews also means that there's no barrier to distance, so a kind of asynchronous way that you can instant message. It doesn't have to be instant, as it were. It can happen over a couple of days. Will potentially allow me to interview international audience members without the constraints of a time difference. Another one of the challenges here is that obviously distributing a survey through your own social media network has an impact on the kind of respondents that you have. It's going to shape my results totally. Whilst I hope to distribute it as widely as possible, so that I've got a high proportion of people in my network, obviously with an academic interest in Shakespeare, and as I'll show you through the responses to my pilot survey, that has potential to shape the results. And it's not necessarily a problem or a barrier to my methodology, it's just something that has to be factored into the analysis. So, the pilot survey. So it's just a version of the survey that I'm hoping to send out, and it was sent directly to a number of people I knew who'd watched Shakespeare Online, a couple of who are here, and to the attendees of Shakespeare Media Technology and Performance Symposium, which is happening in Exeter on Saturday. At the time that I analysed this for this presentation, I had 22 respondents, and really it was designed to test out my survey design in practice, to check the clarity of my questions. And one thing just to point out is that it does exclude under 18, so that's due to the ethics committee requirements, and that will factor into the final survey as well, which is interesting because one of the potential benefits of online theatre broadcasts is that it reaches a younger audience, but obviously that just won't be represented in my survey. That's fine, just has to be pointed out. Okay, so so I split the survey up into 5 different sections. So one question's about how audience members access theatre online, what they access and why. The second was questions about how they watch theatre online, so audience practices, so about who are you watching with, etc. Questions about Shakespeare, questions about other experiences of accessing theatre and Shakespeare, and then 5, finally, a set of demographic questions. So I just wanted to show you a couple of the results. So what do people watch? So this first question here showed that whilst the majority of respondents had watched a theatre production online between 2 and 5 times, a number of respondents had watched a theatre production online upwards of 15 times, with some reporting a figure of around 30. And there's some, I realised this after, as soon as I'd got the results, is that there's some ambiguity in this question. So for me, it was quite shocking that people have seen it 30 times, but obviously I haven't made the question completely clear whether I mean watching 30 different broadcasts or whether I mean did you watch a particular broadcast 6 or 7 times? And unsurprisingly, given my sample was focused at people who had an academic interest in Shakespeare, 8 people said that all of the broadcasts they'd watched had been Shakespeare productions, with quite a lot of people reporting that the majority, or at least half of the productions they'd seen online, had been Shakespeare productions. Okay, so questions of how people access Shakespeare online. So the first question is about how people find out about Shakespeare online. And it's interesting to me that, although it's quite kind of online, very social media focused, the main method of finding out about online theatre that people reported was word of mouth. And again, there's ambiguity in that question, because does that mean word of mouth through a digital form? Would emailing somebody still be word of mouth, or does it mean face-to-face? But it does show that in this sample at least, personal networks are really key to online theatre distribution. So it's not just the kind of official networks that theatres are creating for themselves on their social media presence. It is a personal network as well that's working as a kind of distributor or advertiser. And the answers to question 5 similarly show diversity in the platforms that audiences are using to access broadcasts. So it kind of reflects distribution strategies from theatre companies when they put online theatre out there, which is to embed the YouTube link into a number of partner websites. So, for example, they've got Guardian website down there, which I think Cheap by Jowl used. But it also shows a couple of emerging trends that people are starting to use social media sites not just to find out about online broadcasts, but actually to access them. So Facebook Live, Periscope and Twitter have all been reported. And a lot of people put in the comments BBC iPlayer, which now I can obviously put into the choices. Okay, so the question of why people access online theatre. So I asked the question of which factor is most influential in you choosing to watch a particular theatre production online. And this was the first question. And people reported theatre company in the play, perhaps unsurprisingly. The second part of this question asked for a free-form response describing why respondents watch theatre online. Inability to get to the theatre, convenience, cost, and the removal of travel distance were all cited a number of times, and especially particular to this group, research interests and the need to keep up with developments for teaching were also cited. Okay. So, questions about audience practices. So this set of questions all ask how audiences watch broadcasts online, including questions about preparing for the broadcasts and which devices that they used. So when asked if they prefer to watch theatre online live or to watch later, the majority of respondents actually indicated that they either had no preference at all or that they preferred to watch recordings. So it's kind of surprising and could suggest that people are not, in this kind of experience, not valuing the liveness of the experience. But I found that actually that kind of simplistic reading of it was complicated by answers to the other questions about audience practices. So this question at the bottom says, who do you watch online theatre with? And suggests that it's basically on your own. But some of the comments underneath suggested that actually how they watch a theatre broadcast online is completely dependent on how it's being streamed. So if it's going to be a one-off streaming, audience member might be more inclined to watch it with people, but if it's going to be available for a long period of time, that they potentially wouldn't go to the effort of getting into a group and watching it. So it's beginning to point to a more complex relationship between distribution and reception practices. so the fourth set of questions that I asked were all about Shakespeare. And the first question I asked was just to describe Shakespeare in 3 words. And I think it's quite obvious, I don't know if people can see from the back, that it's a group of academics mainly who answered the question. Some of them were very elaborate. And only 2 words, I mean it's a very small sample, but only 2 words were repeated. So the word malleable and adaptable was they were both repeated twice, interestingly. Also, perhaps more interestingly, is that a third of respondents chose to skip this question. So it's suggesting that there might be, particularly in this sample group, some kind of uncomfortable feeling or resistance towards pinning down 3 words that they could use to describe Shakespeare. Also, in my conversations with my friends, they did suggest other ones, but obviously they didn't put them in. Great. So, but I think it is a useful exercise potentially in kind of working that out. Like, how are people relating to Shakespeare? And how are they imagining Shakespeare if they can't distill him down into 3 words? Him, it, the thing. So there's some other questions about Shakespeare, but another part of it was this kind of statement identification. So asking people to either strongly agree or strongly disagree with a statement about Shakespeare. And interestingly, considering that this group of respondents you would have expected to have a relatively kind of unified feeling towards Shakespeare potentially, there's only really 2 significant things that they agree with, which is Shakespeare has a high cultural value, and also that it's important to see Shakespeare performed rather than just reading the plays. And they strongly agreed with those 2 statements. You can see trends beginning, and I think because it's such a small sample, it's difficult to see what people are actually thinking here. But when the final survey goes out, it's hopefully going to be going to a far wider set of audience members. So it'd be interesting, I think, to see how dispersed people's kind of opinions about Shakespeare are. Okay, so the other 2 sets of questions, which I haven't gone into detail here, am I getting on for time? 3 minutes, okay. Were designed to find out respondents' familiarity with other forms of experienced theatre, and then finally some demographic questions. So unsurprisingly, this set of respondents were regular theatre goers, with only 1 respondent reporting that they hadn't been to the theatre in the past 12 months, and 7 reporting that they had attended the theatre more than 15 times. So beginning to kind of claw towards some conclusions, obviously this is a really small data set, so no firm conclusions can be drawn from this sample about online broadcasts. But even this small survey demonstrates the range of practices that audiences of online broadcasts engage in. And in places, the responses are a lot more dispersed than I would have expected. As I said, it's a group of people you would expect to have relatively similar values in relation to Shakespeare. So I think what's really important going forward, and what I've learned from doing this pilot survey, is I never set out to describe a general online viewer for Shakespeare, but even like the individual questions don't really tell you that much. So as I said, with the link between the 2 when one practice depends on the other, I think what's going to be really important is mining into this data to find trends rather than just describing a general audience. So thinking people answered this question this way also tended to answer a different question a different way. And I think that has the potential to kind of reveal interesting things about online reception. So my only conclusion really is that audience research can be messy, but it has the potential to tell us interesting things about reception, especially this kind of reception, which currently we don't really know that much about, and is a kind of reception that has potential to shape how theatre industry and the theatre experience look in the future.